Welcome to part 2 of presenting the problem presentation. In this part of the presentation or lecture, I'm going to discuss how to write the research questions and the hypothesis and explain what those things mean. And I'm also going to explain what are limitations, delimitations, assumptions, and definitions. And then I'm also going to talk about how to write your title for your research study. Research questions are usually not in a journal article, so you won't find them there. We'll find the purpose statement in the journal article. Sometimes they're in there, but not always. You can derive the research question from the purpose statement, and you're going to do something like that in assignments through this class. And the research questions narrow down the purpose statement down to a specific question that you want answered, or the researcher wants answered. And then we develop the research methods to answer the research question, or questions. It could be more than one question. As with our purpose statement, the research question should be clear and concise, meaning that it should be direct to the point and very, very specific, as the purpose statement was in part 1. Our research question is going to be very specific, and we typically want to use a list format. And again, we should identify the variables in a population in our research question. Now, there's too many words on this slide. I would not typically recommend to have these many words on a slide, but that's just the way it's going to be. So there are 3 main types of research questions. There's what's called the descriptive research question, and what this type of research question does, it identifies our participants' responses to a single variable or question. So an example of this would be, how frequently do participants or the subjects variable at a research question at site? How frequently do basketball players shoot basketballs at XYZ place? Now, not a very good question, but just putting in the blanks there. Now, a relationship question would be like if we had a relationship purpose statement. How does the independent variable relate to the dependent variable for the participants at the research site? Or how are smoking cigarettes related to cancer for male college athletes at Fresno Pacific University? Again, not a very good example, but it's an example. The other ones are comparison research questions. How do 2 or more independent variables or groups differ in terms of 1 or more dependent variable? Now, we use relationships and comparison research questions the most for this class. And so how does group 1 differ from group 2 in terms of the dependent variable for the participants at a research site? So I'm going to give you an example of a research question that's based on our previous example of our purpose statement. So again, our purpose statement was, the purpose of the study was to determine if there were any differences in the intensity of training on the cardiorespiratory fitness for male college athletes. So the research question, were there any differences in the intensity of training on cardiorespiratory endurance for male college athletes? So this is going to be a comparison research question. We're comparing groups, or we're comparing the 2, or the dependent variable, which we have 2 groups of our independent variable, the 40% and the 70% of the VO2 max, to the cardiorespiratory endurance, which is our dependent variable for our specific population of male college athletes. Now, some things you should notice about both the research question and the purpose statement: these were written in the past tense. These are written in the third person. So keep that in mind when you're writing any kind of purpose statements or research questions for this class. So from, again, I'm kind of going out of order. I said in our process we do the hypotheses first, then the purpose statement, then a research question. The reason why I'm showing them in these ways, sometimes it's easier for us to see these in this direction. Again, our hypothesis may not be in a journal article. Sometimes they are, but not always. The only thing is always in a journal article is going to be the purpose statement, because we can pull the purpose statement and the hypothesis from the purpose statement. Again, if you can remember way back when you took science, a hypothesis is just an educated guess. We looked at the literature from the previous research, and we're formulating a guess on what we think if we do a study, this is what's going to happen based on the previous research. It's just a guess. It's an educated guess because we're using the research to help us make a decision on what we think will happen. And exactly like our purpose statement and research question, it should be clear and concise. It's going to follow the same kind of format as our research question. We use basically the same words as our research question and our hypothesis, or excuse me, our purpose statement. Now there are different types of hypotheses. There's the first type is called a research or alternative hypothesis. These are the statistical expectations of the research. Again, this is both for our two types of hypothesis, and they are stated in the direction that by the researcher based on the literature. What direction? Meaning that statistically speaking, if we're going to say it's yes or no, true or false is our direction. Where our example for a research hypothesis, this is what we expect, the researcher expects to happen, is the easiest way to think about our research hypothesis, or research or alternative hypothesis. And so for our example, what we expect to happen is that there were significant differences in the intensity of training on cardiorespiratory endurance for male college athletes. This is what we expect to happen. Well, we don't use typically the research or the alternative hypothesis a lot. We use what's called a statistical or the null hypothesis. And this is what you'll do for your assignment, is the null hypothesis. What the null means is that there is no relationship or no difference between the groups, whatever those groups are. And so, again, we're going to use more of the null hypothesis in this course than the other hypothesis. And here's the example. There were no significant differences in the levels of intensity of training on cardiorespiratory endurance for male college athletes. So the difference between these two is this one that said there was no significant differences, where in this type of hypothesis they said there were significant differences, and our research question said, were there any differences? So we're becoming a little bit more and more specific with each one of these. Again, use these as your examples for this class, how you should be writing the purpose statement, the research question, and your null hypothesis. Now, the other thing that we need to do is define terms. This is typically called operational definitions. So terms that need to be defined are things that people who are reading the paper may not quite understand what the heck those terms mean. Earlier, or in the previous example, I talked about cardiorespiratory endurance and how that was actually measured, and I talked about using the distance a person runs in 12 minutes. That's how it's defined in this particular study. It can be done different ways. That's how it's measured. But what is cardiorespiratory endurance? We have to define what cardiorespiratory endurance is. What's that? What is that? What is a college student? We have to become very specific on what a college student is. What is intensity of training? What do we mean by that phrase? because that's such a broad term. It can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. What is VO2 max? Yeah, we may know what that is, but for this particular study, we need to define what those terms mean. So again, there's probably a lot more terms than you think need to be defined than you will define. So it's always better to define more than not enough. What is a delimitation? This is a term that is confusing to students. If we delimit something, that means we're taking something out or we are restricting something. So it's a choice by the researcher who will be in the study and who will not be in the study. So in our example, the male college student, it's very broad. So we need to become more specific and delimit what that means. Do we delimit that to a certain age group? Do we delimit to just college freshmen? Do we delimit that to specific colleges or sports? It's whatever you, the researcher, want to specify the research subjects to be delimited to. We need to be very specific here on this. And it's not related to limitations. These aren't the same things. Delimitations and limitations are completely different things. The limitations are the things that really mess up your study. These are the thing where you're trying to control the extraneous or the confounding variables here. We want to control different things that can really mess up your study. Some examples of limitations for a study is the equipment you're using is not calibrated at all, so you're measuring a bunch of stuff that actually is not accurate or not. Maybe the questionnaire, the survey, the instrument is not reliable or valid. You're giving out a particular questionnaire to measure something, but it actually doesn't measure what it's intended to measure. That's a limitation to the study. Maybe the subjects aren't motivated. Maybe the subjects just don't really care about what you're doing. That's a limitation of the study. It's anything that messes up your study or could mess up your study. Another word that we need to define is assumptions. What some of the things that when a person is doing is a study, we have to make the assumption about. It can be about the subjects themselves. It can be about the topic. It can be about the conditions that you're placing the subjects under. It can be any equipment surveys, etc. And these can be similar to the limitations. We are assuming that all our participants will try their hardest when they do whatever they're going to do. We're assuming that the survey actually measures what it's intended to do. We're assuming that all the subjects will actually show up. We're assuming that the training exercise that we're doing will actually have an effect on the cardiorespiratory endurance. So these are anything that we are making assumptions about for that study. The things that we're making an education guess. It's not the hypothesis. It's just some things about the design of the study that we are saying that if we do this, we expect this to have a result. Why do I do the title last? Typically because we don't write the title until after we've written the paper in a lot of ways, but we typically don't write the title until we've written a purpose or problem statement, a research question. It should be derived from the purpose or problem statement. It should be very close to it, but not exactly the same. We don't want a long title. It should be pretty short and concise. As Thomas Nelson and Silverman say on page 54 of our textbook, it conveys the content, but this should be done as succinctly as possible. Don't use, the textbook does a really good job talking about this. Don't need to use words like an analysis of, an investigation of. Those are useless words. So when I'm looking at your title for your assignment, I'm looking at what Thomas, Nelson, and Silverman describe as a effective title, and if you don't follow that, it's not an effective title, so you won't get all the points for that assignment. As they say, provide enough information that the readers have an idea what the study or project is all about. Again, I think, can't remember exactly the number of words, but I think there's a number limitation that the authors talk about, 14 words or something like that. So keep it brief and to the point. It should be linked to your purpose statement. Summary. So what? The conclusion of this lecture is that our introduction, the whole introduction, I'm talking about the introduction, the actual introduction, your purpose statement and research question, all those things, the delimitation, even the study title, provides the reader with an overview and a summary of the study. Another way to think about it, it provides the bones of the study, provides the structure for the study and what you're going to move forward on next, which is developing the methods. You have to know what you're going to do, and that's the purpose statement, before you can actually develop the research methods. And that's the next part that you're going to listen to about Chapter 4 is developing the methods, and how to actually formulate the chapter or the section of your paper on developing research methods. Even though that's the majority of this class is all the different methods, in order to develop the methods, you have to have a purpose and have to have all this other information in order to develop your methods.